genre cinema endures. And it is an absolute honor. Please give a warm welcome to Miss Barbara Steele. I know you were here. You were in Portland recently for the Living Dead Con. Have you ever actually been here to this neck of the woods before?
Well, I was here maybe 25 years ago, but that was a personal visit. So it's actually, I just find it wildly beautiful and seductive Seattle, and very inviting. And the people seem so much more stable and so much happier than in the dreaded LA.
Tell us a little bit. I'd like to go way back and just kind of get an idea of where you were coming from up to the point of being an actress. I know you had studied art extensively. You were a painter. Kind of what was the evolution from an interest in art and just general creativity into the acting profession for you?
Well, it was all a mistake actually, because I was just getting my degree in London, and you get these long summers off in university in England. So I went and was painting sets in Scotland, and then it's such a dreary story. Anyway, the lead actress became ill, and they didn't have a stand-in. This was at something called the Citizens Theatre, a beautiful theatre. And so I knew all the dialogue, so I stepped in, and oddly enough, there was a woman there that night in the audience who was like scouting for rank, J. Arthur rank, to put people under contract. So she saw me in this play, which was Bell, Book and Candle. And,
how apropos.
Yes, and then I signed my life away to this contract, for like, $10 a month or something.
Which is very interesting because you strike me as a very much a free spirit. What was I would imagine there might have been a little bit of discomfort with the studio system. Is that a fair assessment?
I mean, this is 1,000 years ago. Everything was like, J. Arthur Rank. They had this wonderful Georgian house surrounded by it. It was like Downton Abbey. And you had the studio that was off in the corner, and everyone had these drunken lunches with these amazing lawns. And I thought, well, this isn't so dreadful.
So, as far as early acting goes, I know you had a few TV gigs. You were on Danger Man at one point, and I also noticed that you were an extra in the 59 version of the 39 Steps.
That was up for J. Arthur Rank. Yeah, they threw me into about 20 tiny parts. So this is, I think, is how you're going to learn to act, unfortunately. I really have to say, I totally regret that I didn't go to the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art and studied all the great authors, all the great Shakespearean, because there's nothing like it, because that is your personal experience, which is really important. But anyway, so I tripped over and sort of had a contract and became a starlet.
What was the first point? What was kind of the first role or the first point at which you realized that you were a legitimate working actress and that you were playing leads?
Well, I don't know. I don't think that I was emotionally understood until I got to Italy, and that was definitely Italy. And obviously it was Mario Bava, but it was just not only merely Mario Bava. It was the whole ambiance of the Italian nature and Rome in that period, which was so, post-World War II, everybody coming out of this devastation and the blitzes, and even though 10 years later, it's still laid on everybody's heart in a very heavy way. So, but in Italy, there was this kind of economic surge and this kind of wonderful kind of joy and this sense of connection and insane creativity that came out of all of that.
It was a real creative renaissance at that point.
Fabulous.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fabulous directors, fabulous painters, fabulous everything. Beautiful men.
I've seen interviews with you in the past where you've talked about that entire ambience and just about the simple act of eating lunch on a set with Italians and what a wonderful atmosphere it was.
It is. It's like being emotionally fed. It's like having the mother that you always wanted, Rome, And the Italians never do anything alone. You're always in a group. It's like everybody is like feels included. It doesn't matter how rich they are, how poor they are, how anything they are. It's just this kind of heart.
So let's jump a couple of years forward to Black Sunday, arguably your breakout role. Give us an idea of the steps to which you went to step into the role and working with
Well,
Bob.
actually, I have to say, I had this contract. My right contract was bought out by 20th Century Fox before that, and so I came to the States, and they put me. I always forget to mention, they put me immediately in this Elvis Presley movie because I could ride horses. But of course, you ride differently in England because you're the rise to the, and you know. But anyway, I was thrown into this western. They made me a blonde. It was a Don Siegel film, and Elvis was my sort of half-breed fiancé. And we've been through this insane massacre, and I am now a blonde, dressed like Doris Day in fabulous kind of little pink and white checkered pants, and I'm riding my horse, desperately through the woods, galloping away, and I've just been, been through this massacre of like 200 people, and I arrived like the perfect virgin, and I think this is nuts. Not knowing anything. So I get this, I go to get some earth of the 20th century lot and mix it with some water and make this mud and sort of put it on my costume to make myself look somewhat wrecked. And of course, this is not in the script. They don't have a second costume. They go berserk because this is like, they come in and then Don Siegel, the director, had this insane tantrum. We had this major fight. And I have this dressing room, and I remember I'm very young, shoving all of this makeup onto the floor. And that night, I drove home, and I went straight to the airport, and I said to a friend of mine, you can give all this furniture away, which I sort of collected in a 3-month period I've been there. And you can give away my car, you can give away everything. I'm never coming back. And I took a plane to New York, and it was sublime. It was snowing and beautiful, and I couldn't believe it. And I said to the cab driver, take me to the best hotel. I had like $400 on me. So he took me to the plaza, and the orchestra was playing. They used to have a little orchestra play in the tube. It was just like going into Cinderella. It was just the most glamorous thing with all these chandeliers and this music and this snow. And I thought, hello, yes, this is it. And I walk out that evening to a little bookstore, because it's right around Christmas time. I walk up the street and I bump into an unknown couple who happened to be a writer called Howard Fast. And he, who wrote Spartacus. And they invited me to spend Christmas with them, which was really nice. But they called up a journalist called Joe Himes, who came tearing over to the plaza and wrote this incredible, fabulous, bitchy piece. And then the 20th Century Fox called me up and said, no. I said, I'm never coming back. They said, you'll never work again. I said, I don't care. Goodbye. That was that.
And you didn't look back. Oh, wonderful. So you're stepping out of that rather fractious atmosphere into working on Black Sunday.
Right.
Please, I would love to have been a fly on the wall during this shoot. I would love to have gotten an insight into how he worked, how Baba worked, and how you worked with him.
Well, he was a very internalized, quiet man, Mario Bava. In fact, he was not like an Italian at all, actually. He was very correct and almost like an Englishman in his kind of demeanor. And he was also in somewhat of a depression when he made that film. And so the whole crew was asked to wear black and white film. There was no color allowed absolutely anywhere. And he was extremely civilized, and he used to be a cinematographer, as you must know. And so he was primarily concerned about the visual impact of this film more than the actors. So it was how he was going to on very little money, create this visual masterpiece. And I think we were secondary, actually. I feel that I'm telling a vile secret.
But I don't think so, because I think it speaks to your kind of intuition and skills as an actress, that there's such nuance between the dual roles that you're playing in Black Sunday.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you.
I mean, I would imagine it would have been like I would imagine you found it a very interesting challenge, especially as a young kind of beginning actress, to craft a role that's actually really, you know, for the time, a very complex, you know, set of roles for
Well, it's
for a
very
woman.
interesting, well, because you see, you're seeing it from the outside 1,000 years later. I mean, we see it, we, the actors that are involved, we just see it on a day-to-day level. We don't see it in this sort of largesse, this kind of intelligent kind of projection. We are just desperately grateful to be there and have these fabulous luncheons thrown at us. All with little bottles of wine.
Oh my gosh.
A little bottle of red, a little bottle of white.
Or two, or three. So at this point, you, before launching into a succession in the mid-60s of a lot of other Gothic horror, you had the very wonderful experience of working with Federico Fellini on Fellini's 8 1/2.
Yes.
Please fill us in on the details in that.
Well, everybody knew Fellini was like a witch. He was a totally intuitive magician. He saw all of Rome when he was casting. This entire room could walk over to this corridor and wait to meet Federico, and he would talk to everybody for 20 minutes and say, well, how's your love life? What did you eat yesterday? Do tell me. And everybody went. Everybody went. It doesn't matter whether they sort of aristocratic comtesses, or whether they were hookers, or whether they were dwarfs, or whether they were barbers or school teachers. Everybody went, and they all sat in this corridor for, like, you know, forever. And he had these walls plastered with all these photographs. He was just so intensely intrigued with this human connection and everything. Nobody was irrelevant to him. It was just this phenomenal psychic generosity of heart that he went into the souls of all these people.
That shows in his films, obviously.
Yeah, it does show in his films, particularly in his black and white early films.
What was
Strada and
as far as working with actors, it sounds to me that Fellini's technique was most definitely, I think, a lot more like there was a lot more human interaction. Is that a fair assessment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. He was very conspiratorial with everybody, and even with extras in the distance, like he would always give them something to do, to smell a flower, or walk on tiptoe, or anything. Everybody felt very specific, very needed, very adored, and and you just knew that he was incredibly. You just knew that you were actually in the orbit of a real magician. And he had this guy from Sicily who was a sort of a magician who looked like Rasputin, who would crack eggs into an elaborate glass. And then one day we're there with like 1 billion extras all dressed in white, and the orchestra's playing. And there is this guy who's cracking eggs in a glass with his other little bits and pieces of amber and God knows what. And he says, no, not today. And Fellini says, oh God, but I've got like 200 extras all the way. No, it's impossible. You cannot shoot today. Everything will be ruined. As it happened. We all went away. And the producer, Rizzoli, had a nervous breakdown. He went totally batshit.
My entire day has been made just to hear Barbara Steele say that shit. Tell us a little bit more. I kind of almost want to do a list a movie, ask for impression situation, because you did so many classic Italian Gothic films that, for example, I'm really super fond of Nightmare Castle, and I'm really fond of your work in that. And I also, you said some very interesting and insightful comments about Helga Linné, one of the leads in the film, who went on to become a very prominent European genre star in her own right. What was it like working with the director, Mario Ciano? Again, another dual role seems to be, a recurring theme.
Yes, but that's very Italian, because life has this duality there.
Yeah.
But, it was so insanely Catholic then, full of these amazing parades, weddings, funerals, these incredible cardinals, like, floating through the day. It was just fabulous, and she was so beautiful.
Striking woman, yes.
Oh God, I thought she was so incredible. I thought we should switch roles. What the hell?
I was just vigorously, as with everyone else here, but yeah.
I was really
presence.
intimidated by her beauty and her kind of severity. I thought she was really very interesting.
And actually, that brings up something that I did want to mention, which is that I think one of the reasons why your work endures, in large part, I think, is because of the uniqueness of your features. You have incredibly expressive eyes that I think they can engender sweetness or malevolence in equal measure. Is this something that's just kind of you're not next door? I got to get all in that I can here. But as far as utilizing those tools as an actor, is that something you were conscious of at the outset, or something that kind of evolved?
No. I really liked working with very emotional directors who were like mini operas. So like Ricardo Freda, I really loved, because he was always having phenomenal tantrums. And, we'd work 18-hour days, and all these movies were made in like 10 days, It was just incredible. And, but they were all like a feast, really, of intimacy and kind of a fun. We should have sung them all.
Which would be extremely apropos for an Italian environment.
That is true. But I must say that, the Italians have this, Italy has this most beautiful light, as does Mexico. But Italy has there is something in the light there that you can understand where all these amazing painters emerged in the Renaissance and everything from this Italian light, which is so magical and enhancing and fabulous. And so all these cinematographers were so extraordinary then. So I never felt that we were really making a horror film. We were just like making these movies that had this kind of, this dark and kinky kind of, little streets in them. We weren't like sort of, slashing people to smithereens. And so they were very, these films were very, they were almost like Victorian melodramas.
Absolutely.
In the way that they were, made. And Italy had one foot in the 19th century then, and then the rest of it in the 20th century.
I also wanted to ask you about Antonio Margheriti, who's one of my favorite directors of the era, and you did a couple of films with him, including Castle of Blood from 1964, which if you haven't seen Castle of Blood, it really is one of the great Italian Gothic thrillers in my estimation. And I think a lot of it pins on your presence in the film, being very ethereal yet very vulnerable at the same time. What was that experience like?
Well, I loved Margheriti. He was a wonderful director, and he was a very generous director, and also very connected. So I felt very connected to him and very comfortable. And now I look back and I realize they were all so young. I thought they were all old men then. They were always probably 31 or something.
It's all a matter of perspective. You've had good fortune over the course of your career, I think, to work with a lot of very interesting directors, a lot of great directors, right at the beginning of their careers. And one of my favorite of your roles when you had emigrated back from Italy to America was Caged Heat,
yes.
which was directed by Jonathan Demme.
Yes.
Has anyone here seen Caged Heat? Show of hands. Yeah. It is a women in prison exploitation film but made with a decidedly artistic eye. And I love the part that you play what could be the most thankless stereotypical role on the planet, which is the evil prison warden, evil in air quotes. But you really give a sense of vulnerability and regret in that film. The dance scene that you have, the little kind of dream scene, that's almost Fellini-esque, honestly. What was it like working on that movie? Because it's so much better than the sum of its parts.
I don't know, I sort of given up acting, and I was walking down Sunset Boulevard. This time I was now married to an American writer and living yet again in LA. So anyway, again it's near Christmas, and I'm going to yet another bookstore. It's the story of my life. I'm walking, driving by in a blazing blue, enormous Chevrolet with fins coming up like this, screeches to a halt, and this guy comes out, he says, "Barbara, Barbara," and it's Jonathan Demme. I mean, I don't know whether Jonathan Demme wasn't Jonathan Demme yet.
That's 74, yeah.
No, he was on his way to becoming Jonathan Demme, but he was just a guy.
There's a guy
"Want to take a
accosting you.
ride? I must talk to you. Get in, get in." And that's how I met Jonathan Demme. And we made that movie, I think, in about 10 days, like all the Italian movies.
And all of Roger Corman's movies.
And all the Roger Corman's movies.
But as far as the part goes, I mean, it's a wonderful showcase for you. And
It was nice, it
yeah.
was fun.
What was the atmosphere like on the set? Did Demme?
Well, it was very
Thank you a lot.
hyper, because it always is when you've only got 20 minutes to make a movie.
But that is the Roger Corman way, as
Yes.
we all know. You also had the good fortune of working with David Cronenberg on his very first film,
Yes.
Shivers.
Yeah.
What were your impressions of him? And I mean, it's a small but very pivotal role, but it's very interesting from the standpoint of the beginning of a very kind of innovative filmmaking career, and you being kind of part of that universe. What was it like working with him?
Well, he was very intelligent. I actually met him, I had this little house on the sea in Malibu, and he arrived with this insanely huge, it was a gray and stormy day, and he arrived with this enormous bunch of marigolds. He must have bought like 30 bunches or something. So I was enormously impressed by these orange flowers and this dark gray sky and this raging ocean. He comes to me at my house and we have tea, and he offers me this roll, and I say, "Oh, thank you very much," and oh, sure. And that's what happened.
And again, the rest, as they say, is history. Another one of my kind of favorites of that 70s era roles is Piranha,
Yes.
which is great fun, and working with another young director from the Corman stable,
Yes.
Joe Dante. Tell us a little bit about that.
It's
experience.
astounding, because I made all these movies and nobody ever asked me to say a word. I just couldn't believe it, no dialogue to learn, nothing, just sort of wander through and say three words. What was it like? Well, that was fun. It was a lot of fun. It felt like a high school romp. And actually, we were running out of money, and I think we had to auction something off to try and make a little bit of money to make ends meet. I forget what it was. Something completely stupid, like a gramophone. I don't know. Something that needed another $300 or $400 to complete the thing before we so we could pay somebody something. Anyway.
I also wanted to just actually leap a ways forward, because you've actually done some really interesting work just recently in the last few years. I had a chance to recently watch The Butterfly Room, the
Yes.
film that you did, which is Barbara gets a wonderful, juicy lead role in The Butterfly Room, which is a 2012 film. Very Italian influenced, I think, visually. And you get to play unhinged, and you do it very nicely.
Oh, thank you so much.
What was that experience like, getting back in the saddle as a leading actress?
Well, no, it was great. He's an Italian director. It was his first film. And if you want to like get re-employed, employ me and do your first film with me, because you'll always get another movie.
We have ample evidence as discussed in this panel. Absolutely.
Yeah, and his name was Jonathan Zarantinello, and he's a guy who was born and bred in Venice, Italy, and but was enthralled with the state. And he wrote and we made this film, and that was very interesting. I think it was basically about his mother.
Yeah, there are definitely, you get that between the lines for sure, I think. One of the other recent projects that you did that I'm extremely fond of and was very pleasantly surprised to see you in was Lost River, which is
Oh, no. That was the pits.
Oh my gosh. And
I adore Ryan Gosling, but that movie was just abominable.
Standing from the outside, I kind of like it. But I think your presence in the film is
I was
indelible.
an extra. It was terrible. He arrived at my house with a phenomenal bunch of flowers and his fabulous girlfriend. And they come and they stay forever, and I make them wonderful sandwiches and this and that. And like 2.5 hours later, we're all there, we're all in love. I couldn't believe that I ended up as an extra.
Well, I would argue that your presence in the film is indelible.
No,
It would not be the same if it was just someone else.
Yes, it would.
We get this. This is the first time I've done a panel where someone's argued with me about how bad. Thank you for helping me break that precedent. But I obviously you liked Ryan
And then he
Gosling.
said, no, I adore Ryan Gosling. He said to me, oh, Barbara, I'm just going to give you a marvelous role in the next one. I'm going to give you my... Thank you, darling. And then at the very, the house burns down, and we went against all the rules. We shot in Detroit, which was the suffering and collapsing left, right, and center. And they bought this house for like $5,000 so they could set it on fire. And, I thought the scene was really ludicrous. And I'm in this. I gave him great ideas. They didn't do any one of them. I wanted to have like a pet ferret or something that I would feed little biscuits to. I thought, oh, his mouth would be so interesting in with this sort of deranged face of this woman. But no, I didn't do any of that. I gave him tons of ideas. He didn't do any of them. And then I just was supposed to be burnt in this chair of rage and regret. And at the last minute, he comes up to me and said, could you possibly have an orgasm as you're being burnt?
Okay. I will completely backtrack and say, yes, this sucks. All right. And on that merry note, I would love to turn this over to the audience. Does anybody have any questions for Barbara?